1. I was 22 and backpacking through Asia with a woman I met on the journey. One night we were staying with an Indian family in Puri, India, and my companion and I were having some rather quiet and slow backpacker sex, so as not to disturb the nice old landlady. Partway through the quite sedate sex, I was suddenly not in my body at all. I was floating in a sort of very dark blue void. And sat in front of me in that void was a woman. The woman was cross-legged and naked, sat as if meditating. Light brown skin, long dark hair, powerful looking. She was looking at me with an intent gaze. She was around 40 feet away from where I was situated, 12 meters. She was sat as if on a floor, but I couldn't perceive one. Just a deep blue null space all around us. I was shocked and then, to be honest, terrified. I didn't know what to do and was frozen in shock. Not at all sure what the hell was happening. It wasn't really that long though, perhaps 5 or 10 seconds. I snapped back to reality after those few seconds elapse, where I was still in the middle of having sex. I leaped up and started acting like a crazy person, and quietly started to explain in somewhat terrified terms what I had just experienced to my companion. I'm not sure how relevant the next part is, but she said, "Maybe that woman was me," and I said, "I don't think so." The woman shared a few characteristics, long dark brown hair, but in general was a different person, though who knows. It's not like this made any sense at all. I wasn't high or asleep, and the sex was just normal, quiet, before we go to sleep sex that we had just started. I was kinda traumatized, and said I had to go for a piss, and stepped outside to gather my thoughts. I sat on a wall for 15 minutes trying to figure out what happened. When I returned, my companion was a bit moody about it. We did not resume our activities. Veracity talk. I very much doubt there was carbon monoxide pumping into this shack, and I am plainly not an amateur writer looking for cool points. Otherwise I would have made this a lot more exciting and better written. As far as misremembering or it was a waking dream kind of explanations, I was very much awake and actively engaged. The reason I remember the occurrence so well is that it was so embarrassing. A sexual partner who leaps up partway through and starts talking about blue voids and floating women. I felt pretty strange about it all. My companion took it quite well, considering. Anyway, make of it what you will. I've never experienced anything similar since. I'm not really sure if it was a glitch, but it was very weird. 2. I was working as a project manager for an accounting software company. My team had been working with a very difficult client for months. Every time we submitted our work, the client decided that they wanted more, they wanted less, they wanted this changed or that changed. We would make suggestions that they ignored. We would submit again, and they would then decide they liked our suggestions. It was dragging on far too long, and my team was getting fatigued. At this same time, my mother's health was failing. She was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and had about 5 months to live, as it turned out. So I stopped at her house on my way home every day to spend time with her and check on her. She was a feisty old broad, so she took care of herself until she had to start hospice care 3 days before she passed. So one day at work, my team submitted our latest coding and sent it off to our client. It was a Friday. So I told my team that if this latest work was accepted, we would all be leaving work as soon as we heard the good news. And we all sat back and waited. Miracle of miracles! We got that call before noon and our job was finally done. For the record, our software had gone full circle and was 99% the same as our first submission. But whatever, I don't hold a grudge. So we left early that day just before lunch, which was pretty much unprecedented, and I drove to my mom's. After some time, I had found the ultimate best route from work to mom, and never varied my route. I spent several hours with my mom that day, and we had a glorious time. I remember that day like it was yesterday. I really felt our time together that day was significant and blessed. As it turns out, I ended up leaving her house at about the same time I usually left work. To get home, I virtually had to pass my office, so I used the same route as when driving from work to mom's, only in reverse. I was slowing down for a stop sign about 10 minutes into the trip home, when I noticed a car stopping at the opposite stop sign. It was exactly like my car. At the time, I drove a 2003 Pontiac Aztek. Yep, that sad little car was cool for a minute, before it was blowing up and breaking bad. And my car was absolutely filthy, as I just didn't have the time to deal with it. The car opposing me, same model, same year, same filth. I even noticed the same dent on the driver's side rear panel. Of course, I was curious, so as we passed each other, I checked out the driver. She looked exhausted and sad. She stared straight ahead, so she never saw me. And she was me. Same hair, same face. Same hands on the same places of the steering wheel. I was driving past myself. I was going home, but I was also driving to my mom's at the exact time I did virtually every other day. That poor version of me apparently was still being yanked around by a difficult client, and was feeling the stress and strain of another hard day, while this version of me was finally done, and had a great day with Mom. I saw the car in my rearview mirror as I realized I had instinctively started to brake, but almost immediately the other car turned around a bend and was gone. I was shaken, so I pulled over to get my wits back. I kept telling myself I couldn't have seen what I saw, that it just had to be some crazy coincidence, but I knew better. When I got home, I called my mom. I acted cool, like I just wanted to tell her I got home safe. She wasn't at all surprised by my call, so I knew that I wasn't sitting there talking to her. But there was no question in my mind that I had just witnessed something extraordinary. 3. Background. I work at a funeral home in Florida. Part of my job is that I go on removal calls, which is exactly what you hope it isn't. Dead bodies don't bother me, and I'm the youngest, closest to fit guy they have. So if we get a removal call from someone of any decent size, or in a house that could be awkward to maneuver in, they send me and one of my co-workers to bring the deceased back to the morgue or crematorium. Anyways, early this morning my phone rings and I get asked to remove a man from his home a town over. I get dressed and head out, and by 3 a.m. I am riding in a hearse down the creepiest dirt road in the creepiest hammock with the creepiest fog that I've ever seen. Even though the moon was 3/4 full, it was super cloudy, and there was absolutely no light. I don't know why, but pine trees and palmetto just give me the creeps anyways, so I was already kinda edgy. Eventually, and I do mean eventually, we get to this old brick cabin. I know we weren't exactly very far out, but just the general vibe of the destination made it feel like we were a good 30 miles from any point of civilization, or 20 miles from the nearest Taco Bell. We get out, and my co-worker Al knocks on the door. Now, Al has been our funeral director since long before I came aboard. Somewhere around 25 years or so. He's as old as he is short as he is round, and by this point he's pretty much seen it all, so I tend to just follow him. He knocks on the door once, twice, 3 times with no answer. He asks me to go around and see if I can spot anybody through the windows. I walk around this entire house, and the first thing I notice is that all the blinds are open, and all the lights are on, but there's nobody in there. Not a soul in sight. I report my findings to Al, and when he reassures me that we do in fact have the right house, I suggest we call them and let them know we're here. He responds by taking a short moment to consider my opinion, before opening the door and waddling inside like the trooper he is. I am obviously not thrilled with the idea of going into someone's house unannounced, but I followed anyway because they were expecting us, given that they called us and all. Besides, I was getting more creeped out by the minute, and didn't want to be left alone. The front door led to the laundry room for some reason, and from there we make our way through the kitchen, living room, and dining room, all the while Al is calling out to absolutely no response. The only sounds in the house was a baby monitor on the dining room table, which emitted constant static, as well as echoing Al's shouts from the other end of the house. Eventually, we made our way to the hallway. I call it the hallway because once you reached it, the entire house completely changed. Up until this point, every room had been well lit with very warm lighting, pleasantly decorated, and nice and roomy. It was actually really inviting. Once you got to the hallway, however, it becomes very dim, completely plain, and so cramped that Al had to turn sideways to make it through. And that entire half of the house was like this. It's like they just gave up building halfway through. I feel the need to draw so much attention to this, because it was just such a sudden, abrupt, and massive change from the rest of the house. My first thought was that this half was just an add-on, but no. The front door was in the middle of the hallway. Everybody just used the laundry room door because it was closer to the gate and easier to maneuver through. Plus, the only very tiny bathroom was on this end of the house. It was weird. Anyways, when we got to the hallway, Al lets out one more hello. Right on cue, a fucking cowboy materializes just around the corner, and speed walks towards us with a huge smile on his face, coming to shake our hands. He welcomes us in and leads us to the very back of the house, into a tiny bedroom with one tiny lamp in the corner lighting the whole room. In this room was the cowboy, his mother, his deceased father, and the father's nurse. It was here that I noticed the other baby monitor, the one that was picking up Al's shouts and playing it back on the one in the dining room. But nothing else, which means that they could hear us calling to them. But nobody said anything the entire time, and the cowboy didn't move until a solid 45 seconds later when he speed walked into the hallway. Anyways, we chatted for a few minutes, and when a puppy came up to me, the mother let me know that her name was Precious. This is noteworthy, because it was the only time when I saw the woman move. In fact, when I first came into the room, she was blankly staring at a wall, and I initially mistook her for the person we were here to remove. It's also worth mentioning that she just disappeared at some point during the removal. Like 1 minute she was there, and when I took my eyes off her for a second, both she and Precious were gone. I was standing in the only doorway, and I do not remember either one walking past me. That was the last time I saw either of them, though as we were halfway through the hallway on our way out, I could hear Precious barking from somewhere in the house. So we eventually got to work. The hallway was too small for the cot to turn the corner, so Al, the nurse, and myself carry the man down the hallway. Eventually we make it, and the rest of the removal goes smoothly. One thing that unsettled me, though, was the cowboy. While it's not uncommon for family to stay in the room as we move the body onto the cot, most of the time they choose to leave, or at least back up. It's not ugly per se, but it's just not very pretty to watch a recently departed loved one get manhandled onto a stretcher by two extremely out-of-shape men. The cowboy, however, stayed right on top of us, smiling and talking about building a fence the entire time. It wasn't weird in the moment, but looking back, it just felt off. From that point, once we got out of the hallway, the rest of the removal went off without a hitch. We made it back to the funeral home, and Al starts preparing to embalm. If he found the whole situation as weird as I did, he sure as hell didn't show it. The whole thing was just totally bizarre and felt off. My little brother wants me to go back tonight to see if the house is still there. I've got a feeling that the man we picked up first set foot in that house yesterday, no older than I am now. I wouldn't really be surprised if my boss never actually got a phone call, but just dreamt it, and then woke up with her phone in her hands already dialing me. Either way, they came in to make arrangements this afternoon, so hopefully I get another story to tell from the funeral itself. 4. I lived in Preston in England for most of my life. In a park near to where my home was, there was a concrete bridge with 2 stout square pillars at each side of one end, and white metal railings in between. It's also very wide and would take between 15 to 20 strides to cross it. It crosses the River Ribble, which cuts straight through to the aforementioned park. The only reason I'm going into this much detail is because I want you to know that this isn't just a few planks of wood over a stream. It's quite a significant landmark to the local residents. My friend, we'll call her Tamsin, and I were walking home from the park, and we crossed the bridge. We were 11 and were talking quite intently about someone we didn't like at school. Although we were mostly focused on conversation, I was mindful of 3 things. 1, that we passed those small grey pillars as we crossed. 2, that I narrowly missed tripping over one of the 2 bollards used to stop vehicles crossing. And 3, as we walked to the middle of the bridge, I looked out across the river while Tamsin was talking to me, where I spotted 2 white swans. The one on the right had turned its head and was rummaging through its feathers, while the one on the left drew back slightly and began to flap its wings before settling again. Quite a normal sight. We continued walking along the path, through the trees, deep in conversation, for no more than 2 minutes, when I look up and see ahead of me the bridge we had just crossed. We stopped and stared for a moment, and I turned to Tamsin. She looked as confused as I was, and without saying anything, we both turned around. I can't remember what we said to each other, but we were generally clarifying whether what was happening was real. We walked back up the path until we could get a clear view of the path winding back to the park where we had just come from. And nowhere in sight was there a bridge or a river for it to cross. Our attention was now fully focused on this. We crossed the bridge, and again I saw those 2 swans swimming in the same spot. The one on the right nuzzled its beak into its back feathers, and one on the left flapped its wings before tucking them away again, exactly as I saw before. Tamsin even pointed to a discarded half-crushed Fanta can that she saw when we crossed before. We stepped off the bridge, and I turned around and looked at where we had just crossed, trying to get the imprint of the scene into my brain, to ascertain that we had just crossed it. Tamsin was walking up the path, and I followed her. When I'm afraid, I look inwards and analyze things. But Tamsin acts like a caged wild animal, and I could see the panic on her face as we charged forward. When the path finally led us to the familiar dark green gates that led out of the park, the relief was overwhelming. As we made our way home, we were more relaxed and began talking with fascination about what happened and how. We both agreed that we stepped into some kind of wormhole that teleported us from the trees at the end of the bridge to the trees at the beginning of the bridge with such fluidity that neither of us realized. When I told my mum, she suggested that we were so distracted that we'd done a full circle. But I know that's not possible, and I think she does too. So I assume she either didn't believe me or doesn't want to think about things like this. To cross the bridge and then get back to the start of the bridge, we'd have had to have turned around and crossed over the bridge again without noticing, as the only other bridge that crosses the Ribble is about a quarter-mile east of where we were, in a different part of the park. In other words, a wormhole is probably more likely than us making a U-turn. This in itself is scary enough, but what still scares me is the swans. It might just sound coincidental to see 2 swans performing normal swan-like behavior twice in a day, but if you saw it with my eyes, you would see that both sites were a cookie-cutter replica of each other, like watching an advert twice. Tamsin and I went to different secondary schools, junior high, but were together again in 6th form, and I asked her if she recalled what happened that day. She did, and she said we should go there again together and see if it happens again. I agreed, since I'd been across the bridge with family numerous times since the incident, and nothing happened. But we left 6th form before we got the chance to conduct this little experiment. I'm glad, in a way, because I personally wouldn't want an experience like that again. But at the same time, I hope Tamsin and I aren't the last people to experience this glitch. 5. I recently decided I was going to gauge my ears up a size. They were at 7/16, but my manager at work asked me to take them out because they had feathers that dangled. The size was not the issue, but I only had 3 pairs of 7/16, and my half-inch gauges had cute little aliens on them, so I gauged up. Anyone who has gauges understands the struggle of keeping the rubber stoppers on your ears. A normal pair of plugs will come with 2 rubber circular back stoppers to go on the front and back of the gauge to keep them from falling out of your ear. I spent 99.9% of my time picking these fuckers up. Anyways, my left ear only had 1 stopper because it had fallen out in my sleep and I couldn't find it. In fact, it had been off my gauge for about 2 days. I was sitting in my boyfriend's friend's driveway. I had my hand on my face to hold myself up, and as I turned my head, I felt both stoppers on my right ear fall off. They just kind of rolled off the way a rubber band rolls onto your wrist. I knew they had fallen off, so I immediately felt my ear to make sure they had fallen off. Both stoppers had indeed fallen off my ear. I found both stoppers, that wasn't the issue. I placed the front stopper back on my ear and proceeded to put the other side on the back when I realized the back stopper was on my gauge again. I know for a fact that they both fell off. Not only did I watch both stoppers land in my car seat, but I felt my earlobe. Now I had suddenly found a stopper for my left ear that I lost in bed while I was sleeping. I have experienced a few glitches like this, but this is the most recent and strongly irrational glitch I have experienced. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Glitch in the Matrix Stories, episode 79. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use and sent in stories for use in this video. Just want to say thank you to everybody who's been joining me on the recent live streams. I'm not sure how frequently I'm going to do them, but I'll try and do at least... Well, actually, let's not commit to a schedule. I'll keep doing them whenever the mood takes me, and hopefully that'll be at least once a week, but we'll see. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.